Welcome to another Zenler podcast, and today we're going to be talking all about branding and design. And I am over the moon that I have a branding and design expert. Iain Hamilton is joining us today. So Iain, welcome to our Zenler podcast.
Hey David, I'm glad to be here. Nice to speak to you, and I'm hoping we can get to the heart of some really juicy stuff here.
Yeah, I've given Iain a little list of things I'd like to cover. It's quite a lot, so I always try and get the maximum out of these things. So it's going to be quite brief on a lot of these points. We try and keep this under 30 minutes. So Iain, tell people a little bit about yourself.
Well, I'm a long in the tooth brand designer, so I've been doing this for a long decades, mostly in the commercial space, but most recently in the last 5 years, I guess, a bit more into the personal branding thing. Since that's been taken off, there's been a bit more demand for that, so I'm kind of bridging those two worlds. So, and a lot of mentoring these days, a lot of that kind of leadership mentoring of both designers and entrepreneurs who need a bit more guidance.
Yeah, I mean, that's a big thing as well. It's getting right on the right track. These are the things that branding experts know, designers know inside out, don't even have to think about it. But for people that are trying to do any of this stuff or save money by not hiring people to do it, then these sort of consultations are priceless. That's what I found, in my opinion. So let's talk about it. So what is branding and design to you, Iain?
Yeah, well, there's a lot of confusion around it, right? I mean, on one hand, there's a lot of people jumping into the teaching space of branding and design who don't really have the background, and they're kind of reading up and doing courses and then teaching other people and so on. But, in-depth, experience going over decades, you start to see how things really work, the machinations behind it all, And so the point of branding for everyone, and this goes for multi-global international companies making widgets for everybody, to the mom and pop shop, to individual entrepreneurs in their basement just trying to get things started up. It's the same thing because the principles all apply. It's just about human psychology, David. And so the way I like to explain it, and this is my own personal interpretation, but it's association. And it's essentially, what is it that you want to be associated with? Authentically, what can you claim to be associated with? What kind of feelings, what kind of attributes do they represent you, and what are they, and how do you craft all of your messaging so that that's true and people can actually see that, and not only just see it but also be distinctive, right? Because if you're just like everybody else, there's so many other brands out there. I mean, typical supermarkets, I think, now have something like over 150 individual SKUs on their shelves, right? So 150,000 rather. That's a lot of brand competition, right? So there's a lot of busyness and clutter in the marketplace. It doesn't really matter what marketplace. So being distinctive and being authentic are the keys to brand in a way for everybody, no matter what level you're operating at.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree 100% on that. It's that, guys, you listening to this, you probably think, well, what about colors? What about a logo? What about the most important thing is the message? And this has always been the thing. And it's like, what is your unique selling point? How can you stand out from the crowd? And that's exactly what branders do. They'll take it and they'll find what that is before any of the colors, before doing the logo, before setting what types you're going to use and keeping all things consistent. These are the first things that you must think about.
Yeah, so it's important also to consider that message isn't just copy. A lot of people think it's all copy focused, and that design and colors and logos and things are really just, kind of cosmetics that, pretty things up, make things pop and all those things. But in actual fact, there's a lot of messaging behind that. And a good designer will use and leverage color psychology, use of space and imagery, all those things in very subtle ways that actually convert and lead people towards that, crucial association that we spoke about.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you look at a lot of the Renaissance artists, they never use black, never use white. But you look at their paintings and you think there's black and white in there, but there's not. It's a subtle use, and the subtle use of things like red. So they'll put a little speck of red somewhere, only one, because it's such a powerful color, but it will draw your eye in, and then it will draw your eye across. And they will have done this on purpose. It's not just, they didn't just paint it. And this is the same thing that Ian's talking about here. It's very powerful, this kind of way of thinking. And people might be listening to this podcast and thinking, oh, I just got to put a logo together and keep things consistent. And then it's that, but there's much more to it like that. But you have to start somewhere. And especially if you're trying to teach people that are new to this, you have to give them a way into it, because it's scary to know all of this information in one big flop.
Yeah, and there's such a thing as over-investing in this. If you're starting up, you don't need all the bells and whistles, but I think it's more important to understand what your association is. Like, what is the key word? If you could find one word that represents who you want to be, who you authentically are, if you're that kind of, if you're an individual marketing yourself, but if you're establishing a small startup company or something that's small, your budgets are tight, don't invest in high-end design and all those things. Just, I would say, focus really primarily on what that association is. What is that one word or two or three words at most, really, that you want to be associated with, and then craft everything around that. If you want to be strong and you want to be sharp, you're not going to pick a nice light color of pink for your website. Like, those kind of things should be obvious for most people, right? And your messaging, your words, your vocabulary you use, if you're going to be strong, your vocabulary has to kind of echo that. And you can't use kind of lighter, more of a kind of airy kind of language. You need to be much more vibrant. So those are the kind of things I would focus on that don't require any investment, really. Just think about what those associations are that you really need, that will really represent you, and then look at that across your colors, your marketing, all of your language, everything else. And that's really where to start. Minimum budget.
Yeah, perfect. Good advice there. So how important do you think the branding and design is? How important is this? Is this such a crucial part of it, rather than someone just going, I've got an idea and I'm just going to write it out and I'm going to look at that website, I'm just going to copy that and just do it there. How important is that branding side to someone's business from the start? I mean, obviously things go through development, but from the start.
Yeah. Well, that's a great question. In fact, being in the branding business, I could tell you how important it is overall. But first, from starting up, here's the thing. Most people aren't ready to buy immediately, right? The vast majority of people that you come across aren't really ready to pull the trigger on a sale, especially if they don't know who you are. So there's that engagement period. And so you have to stay top of mind, and you have to be memorable through that engagement period. Right. Otherwise, you just fade away. And then, when it comes time for them, when they get ready to actually really seriously consider a purchase, then you're already part of a crowd somewhere and they've completely forgotten. So there has to be something distinctive and memorable about you. And that's part of what branding is as well. And that's why I keep coming back to this association, because if you can get the associations right and just keep reinforcing that, that's what sticks. That's what really sticks. And especially if it's distinctive to you, which it has to be. If other marketers, 2 or 3 marketers are using the same kind of positioning as you, you're going to have difficulty standing out from them. And so when it comes time for that customer or potential customer of yours to make that purchase decision, you're kind of lost in the crowd. So be distinctive, get your associations correct, be memorable. Those are the key points. And then we're going to touch on one of those coming up.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So that's the other thing is, like, if you've got that brand, you've got that message, should you stay with that, or should you always be thinking? Now, this is on two fronts, because this is the original message that you've come up with. But as we know, when you start doing this work and you start either producing, it could be for products, it could be for online courses, which is what we're talking about because we are Zenler. But is it good to stay with that message, or should you flip flop and say, well, I've come up with a new message this week, so I'm going to use this? And the branding side, should that stay the same? Should that remain constant throughout? What do you feel about that?
That's the other pillar we're going to talk about, which is consistency. So, along with being distinctive and getting your brand association correct and being distinctive and memorable and owning it, but you have to be consistent in it. Now, that doesn't mean you have to put the same posts out, especially social media. People are posting every day, sometimes multiple times a day. You don't post the same thing, obviously. However, everything you do post has to be consistent to what your brand stands for. And in the kind of corporate world, we call that key message pillars. So it's essentially look at 3 to 5 main areas that you represent, things that you do, where you bring value to your customers, and then look at language and what kind of proof points do you have for those things? How can you prove it? And then you just keep re-hitting those. Just find different ways to say them, because consistency of messaging is one of the keys. That's one of the things that make you memorable, is that you're consistent. So all the big brands out there, you see Red, Coca-Cola have owned Red for decades. It's their color and their kind of logo and everything is consistent. Now they change it up in subtle ways to keep things fresh, but at its heart, their messaging, the real thing, refreshing messaging, all of those things, they just keep on hitting that, and they find different ways of saying the same consistent themes.
Yeah, absolutely. I was thinking of one just now. I was thinking Disney. Disney's quite good at this as well. They're using like omni-channel marketing now. But they're making sure that all across all of their social platforms, there's some sort of story, and it's very consistent. You go from one to the other, and it's almost like you haven't jumped into another social site. And you jump to their main site, even with the films, even with what they bring out, it's all very consistent, and you can see that it's them. It's so clear. And it's great.
I would actually go so far as to say, that consistency is probably the most important part of branding. Distinctiveness is obviously very important, because otherwise you just become, vanilla and part of the beige crowd. But being consistent, hitting that same messaging, same themes, and the same visuals, using the same style of photography, using that same color, whatever that color is, as long as it backs up your association, what those keywords you want to be associated with are, then once you've landed on that 1 or 2 color palette, stick to it. And that's where consistency comes in. That's what people remember, and then they become familiar with you. It's just like being a human personality. People are consistent. If you're inconsistent as a person, people start to wonder and back off from you. Whereas when you're consistent, you're always showing up, you're always doing the same things that people can expect and they can depend on you. This brands operate exactly the same.
Yeah, I think it's like people. If you're swapping and changing, people don't trust you. It's kind of like, what's going on? Why is that all changed? Why is that? It almost would feel to people like they've gone into some sort of beta program where you're just testing things out. Don't get me wrong, it's good to test things out at the beginning with some social platforms, but once you found it, you stay with it. And that's what I find. That works for me.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things is, this is all about niching down, as it were. And in a brand perspective, it's really being known for one thing. Right? What is that one thing that you're known for? If you try and spread yourself, too widely, and you're trying to do too many things, then that kind of, really makes murky waters around your brand and who you stand for, or what you stand for and who you are. It mixes people up, and confused minds never buy, as they say. So if you're known for that one thing, what is that? That's this association thing I'm getting at, which might be, any kind of marketing, if you're doing online marketing or any kind of coaching, what exactly is it? Really dial that down, and then figure out what the descriptors are. In other words, what the associations are around that niche that you want to own. So if you're a coach, are you a strong coach, or are you a really soft, intuitive coach? Because most of those are viable markets. You just have to decide which one it is and then stick with it.
Yeah, you can't flick from one to the other.
Exactly.
That would be like, who's that? Unless you got a wig.
Exactly. Don't confuse people.
Brilliant. That's great, Ian. So I want to ask you a question here, because AI it's all about AI at the moment. It's all like this trending thing that's going on. So do you think AI generated media is good? Do you think it will ever replace a designer? So can you tell me your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a big question in the design community right now, as you can imagine, right? And copywriting everywhere you go. And I think at the moment it's actually more of a threat, if you want to call it, to copywriting than it is to design. I don't see it as a threat at all. These are just tools. I'm old enough to have been around. I started my career in the analog days of paste up and magic markers in the studio, and then that transition to computers was huge. And if you didn't keep up, you were left behind. Certainly, there was a lot of doom about that at the time. That people were going to do all their own design, which a lot of people did. But the crux of design, the things that actually add value to it, where it's not a kind of decorative cosmetic service, but things that actually add value. I call it performance design. When you're using tools, psychology tools like color theory, you're using kind of typography to communicate with people in subtle levels. These things really work. That's why major companies invest in them, because they do work at a psychological level, and that's where the designers tend to go. And so AI is another tool I see that's going to get rid of the mundane tasks. So for designers, it's fantastic. You don't have to do all those Illustrator, Photoshop things that you used to have to do by hand. It would take a lot of time, and it would cost clients money ultimately. So all of those things are going to be taken care of by the robots, which is great, and it frees up everybody. And this is true for designers. It's true for design clients like entrepreneurs or even corporations. It frees up everybody to concentrate more on where they're really truly bringing value. And so get rid of the mundane tasks. Inspiration is where design always has been. It's taking what the business challenges are and then making and I'll call it an intuitive leap, because in many cases that's what it is. That eureka moment where you've digested all the information, you go off and you kind of just incubate for a little while, and then suddenly, whether it's in the bathtub or a shower or out running, whatever it is, the answer comes to you, and it's an intuitive leap. And I honestly don't feel, in my experience, AI is not going to make that leap, because it's a logic-based system, right? So it's what does logic not really provide for, and that's where design and other fields, I think, are going to provide the real true answers that have a lot of value.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And I think almost AI, I look at it that AI is really just standing on the shoulders of giants, which are us. It's only using data that it's already got from us. It's only, so it's always going to be building on that, but always from us. We're supplying the data until it becomes a stage. I'm not saying it won't happen, because it probably will, that it becomes conscious and but there'll still be rules, because it's code. We have no rules. Funny, I was talking about this yesterday. We have no rules, and we make things up.
That's the point, is it's always based on a certain logic. It has to be. Whereas there is an intuitive component to things that inspire and rally people, right? And so that is, I'm convinced through the experience I've had in marketing and advertising that is the gap. And in that gap, I actually called it a gap a while back, just talking years ago, a kind of brand gap. But that's the gap that creative people, whether they're filmmakers or writers or designers, they're always going to be there to fill that. And so let's let AI take care of the mundane and look to where we can bring that kind of value.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's that other side of things as well. It's like, the thing is that what I find really interesting is what AI cannot do is it can't sort of project. It has to be right. It has to be right. That has to be done like that, in exactly that way. It can't turn around and make slight differences or make things subtle. It can't even put a story behind why it did it. These are massive things. I did this. Actually, it's a 3D render and of a thing celebrating David Bowie, and I did lots of golden blocks, and I made the blocks move in time to one of the songs. It was actually the Golden Years. That's why they were golden blocks. Then I took a still frame out of when he says Golden Years, and that is the story. That is the whole story behind that print that I did. Now, AI would not be able to work out, even to think like that, because it's so weird, it's so different. It's kind of like, no, I just need to do a poster of David Bowie's The Golden Years, and then you'd end up with David Bowie covered in gold paint or something. It would be so obvious that, and that's where I think the creativity is. You cannot lose that,
Yeah, it's an intellectual thing. Yeah, I mean, that's the whole point, right? It's intelligence. So, which has a purpose, obviously, and serves a lot of needs. But however, And branding in particular and design, there's a huge emotional component to that, and it really speaks to being human. And the intellect doesn't really bridge that. That's why it's kind of an art and science, and it always has been. It always has been that people respond to things emotionally initially. So branding is like that too, in terms of your brand. People will respond emotionally, and then they'll back up whatever that emotion is with their logic, with their intellect. So, that's where human beings are always going to be different from any kind of, intelligence, whether it's artificial or not. Even that emotion, if that emotional component of humanity is missing, then something is missing from that big picture.
Yeah, absolutely. So that is all about the AI side of it. We've covered it. We've got it out of the way. so I want to ask you now. So if people that are viewing in, so give me like maybe 3 of your top tips for people doing any kind of design or trying to pick their own colors or thinking about a logo. I know what you're going to say. Hire me. I'll do it.
No.
But you must have some top tips. What's the top tips you get asked all the time?
Yeah, well, the first one is no, don't hire me. It's because you're not for everyone. That leads into that, is to people to realize that you're not for everyone. So by all means, craft who your message is and identify who your audience is, but realize there's a strength and understanding that you're not for everyone, because that helps you to niche down to who you want to serve and who you want to, be of use to and bring value to. So that's a very important one. I think emotionally, people, especially in startup, you're really trying to find as many clients as you can. You want to pay the bills, and you're looking out and you're trying to get everyone. But if your positioning is like that in particular, so the emotional side of it is one thing, but if your positioning in the market is you're for everyone, you'll attract no one. It's kind of like that old saying: if you stand for, if you don't stand for something, you'll fall for anything. So be something and be that thing authentically and all the time. That's the key to all branding anyway. So figure out what that is. That's the first thing. Second side is how you express that, right? So really, there's so many tools out there. AI, we spoke about, it's just getting started. So people will be able to, it can design your website now, right? In many cases and things like that. It'll pick you a color palette. So, but you have to know what you're describing, right? You have to know what kind of color palette. So you have to have, that's why I come back to what these associations are. What are the attributes of it that are really strong that you want to represent? And AI and other tools, like you have Canva and things like that are available now, who's also using AI. Even Adobe are bringing AI into their platform, and I use Adobe all the time, and they're bringing AI in. So it's going to be a part of everyday life very, very soon. So either wait and get AI to do it for yourself, or get into one of the platforms and use those associations, use that kind of brand sort of psychology as much as you're able to figure those things out. When you get some growth under you, when you get some traction and you're starting to see that it's working, that positioning is working, and your brand is actually getting some attention, that's when you can start to invest and up your game a little bit in terms of making yourself more distinctive through design. Hire someone to help you with that and to solidify that. So that's why I say it's not really, hiring me is not the solution for someone, especially for starting up, and they're really scratching together to get things going. Absolutely not. I mean, most of my clients are already established people who really need to kind of, once you start being successful, you start getting more and more competition. People will find that as well, that there's people snapping at your heels trying to invade your space, and that's when people come to me to kind of refine what they're doing, to solidify that, create more barriers around their own brand, so they're much more protected in that sense from competition, and to use those design elements to kind of enhance all of it.
Yeah, perfect. So what would you say? I'm just going to have a lead off question from this, because I know a lot of people do this, and kind of in a way it works sometimes, but it's I think it's not a good route. I'd rather do it myself. But what do you think about people just going on to, right, I need a logo, I need a brand sheet, so I'll just go to Fiverr, for instance. People, they don't know any of this. They just, oh, that's the cheapest. They bid on this. That's the cheapest.
Yeah, it is cheap, and you get what you pay for. I mean, essentially, if you just need something starting up, honestly, you can go anywhere cheap, because none of it's really going to make any difference. You may as well do it yourself, frankly. some of them look a bit more professional, which might be worth a little bit more of an investment. But true, I mean, a logo doesn't stand in isolation. This is the thing: it's never developed. I've never sold a logo by itself. It's a brand system. It's part of other things, right? It represents that positioning and that association. It's almost like a shorthand for it. It's a shortcut for it. You see the logo, you recognize it, and you, as a customer, as one of your customers, or as the public, would look at a logo and associate it with what it means, the meaning that it has, right? So you look at a Coke logo and suddenly you understand it's Pepsi, it's refreshing, or it's Pepsi. You look at a cola logo, even, it doesn't matter. You get the idea behind it, the refreshing kind of that vitality that all the kind of soda makers kind of come to market with. And you distinctively craft a logo that represents your own place within that. So whether it's Pepsi or Coke, you get blue and red right there. There's a distinctiveness, intentional distinctiveness to differentiate between those two brands, right, in that market. So an actual performance logo is part of a greater system of the colors and the imagery and the feeling and the associations that we spoke of earlier. So that's what I'm saying. At the beginning, if you're just going to Fiverr and you're just getting a logo based on just the name of your business, you're going to get something, and there's different levels of professionalism and how it looks. Most people probably aren't aware of what those quality levels are. So I would say if you're going to do that route, which might be fine for startups, you need something, I guess, then just look for something that suits you. But bear in mind that it's not really going to take you where you need to go. And ultimately, you should level that up and take it to the next level.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of the good old days of clip art. Do you remember clip art?
Oh, yes, I do.
It's the same. It's the same. You go on there. These guys, they're not charging much. Why are they not charging much? Because basically you pay them. They take logos they've already got on the shelf. They won't design it personally for you. They've just got a big catalogue of these things. They'll change the colours around. There you go. Be happy with that. Oh, you want to change to a different colour? Oh, I'll change that for you. That's your revision done. Bang, you're off and out the door. That's about the amount of thought that would go into it. So I'm not saying everybody on Fiverr, of course. There's some really good ones on there, I'm sure of it. But that's just how it works. If you, like Iain said, if you're paying peanuts, you're not going to get something that's very good. Okay.
The other thing to be aware of, David, is there's a lot of plagiarism on those platforms too. So people are going in and they're just taking other people's designs and just change, like you say, change the colors or something. So it has happened that people have found themselves in legal troubles because they've been using a logo they bought in good faith from Fiverr, but it's been lifted from somewhere else, and that the internet's an open place. You can do all sorts of Google image searching, and people protect their brands, and so you just want to be very careful about that. Quality designers just develop things from scratch, and there's always ideas. There's ideas that can be similar and so on, but you'll notice, and that's the thing that every designer is looking to do, is to bring individuality and a real distinctiveness to the work.
Yeah, perfect. Okay, so finally, last question for you, Iain, is a common mistake. So what would you say the biggest blaring mistakes that you see on a daily basis with sites? Let's just focus on sites.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the biggest mistake in branding and design, just in general, is a me too attitude, is to see someone else and copy what they're doing. So, especially someone else who's successful. So it doesn't matter what market you're in, but you look around, you're looking to see what other people are doing. Everybody does this, right? I mean, it's just you look around, see who your competition are, and you find somebody who's doing something fantastic, especially someone who's leading in your market area. And you get this, I want to be like that person. And so you start to emulate, and sometimes not, I'm not saying it's all consciously done. This is just partly natural, is that you want that success, you want that same kind of aura, and so you start to perhaps unconsciously duplicate a lot of what they're doing, and again you just become part of that beige crowd that's just not standing out to anybody. And so that's the last thing you want. You're much better to be eccentric and out on your own, doing your own thing, because you'll be distinctive and memorable, obviously, as long as it's authentic. So I'd say that's the biggest mistake, is to kind of copy others. You can be influenced, certainly. You can see what makes them a success and then see how that can work for you, for your own brand associations. That's totally recommended. Find out what's working, absolutely, for others. But then you have to you can't, if you're too close to what they're doing, forget even the legal side of it. But if you're just too close from a brand perspective, you're not going to stand out. So avoid the Me Too, find out what works for you, and just go 100% into that.
Yeah, that's a really good one. I mean, I actually know there's actually courses and there's coaches out there that actually, I don't understand this, how they're charging people to be part of their course when they're just telling people to copy someone else's site.
Yeah.
It happens all the time. It's like, no, you follow this, and they'll even have the blocks exactly designed like the sites they're copying across,
Yeah. I mean, there's an issue with templates as well, right? Because templates are meant to be individualized. And, so some, like Zenler has some fantastic templates in there, but they're not meant to be just the way they are. I mean, obviously people do need to change colors in the copy and things, but you can tweak things and you can combine things in a certain way that speak your own message. So, templates are useful. They're a bit like AI. They're kind of useful tools, but they're not the be all and end all.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I see lots of blocks where the text hasn't even been changed. I'm like, wow. It's like right on the footer. It's that bottom block. You know the one I mean, the one in grey.
Yeah. Yeah.
They don't change it. I'm like, that's shocking. It's shocking. So yeah, really good stuff. Like, Iain, so if people want to reach out to you, how can they get hold of you? What's your website address? It's going to pop up on the screen, guys.
Sure, that'd be great. IainHamilton.com is my designer website. I do a lot of mentoring for designers. You can find that there if it's more of a mentorship relationship, because I have some coaching on there. The other side is the corporate side, which is statusstrategy.com. And that's a corporate brand development. It's a larger corporate site. So, but IainHamilton.com is where to find me. Definitely reach out. My email contact is there. You can set up a meeting with me online. It's no obligation consultant stuff. The whole idea is to find out if what I can bring is useful for you now, or I'm happy to give you advice about where you're at in your business and what you really should be doing to benefit it.
Excellent. Thank you, Iain. It has been always a pleasure. Always a pleasure. Because, I'm a designer myself. I've been doing it for not as long as Iain, but I always love talking to other branders and designers. It's always an interesting, mind meld of information.
Totally. It's always great to talk to you, David.
Yeah. Thank you, Iain, very much. See you later.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Right. Fabulous. Right. Let me just stop the cloud.